Mr. President, last week I filed an amicus brief calling on the U.S. Supreme Court to hear and then overturn the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling in U.S. versus Sanchez-Gomez. I'm proud to have been supported in this effort by all 15 sheriffs in my home state of Arizona, as well as the Western States Sheriff's Association and the National Sheriff's Association. I should mention this is not a partisan issue we're talking about here. We have sheriffs representing both parties in Arizona. Every sheriff in Arizona, all 15, have supported this amicus. This decision by the Ninth Circuit is just another example of a ruling that is well outside of the judicial mainstream. Unfortunately, in this case, their ruling dramatically undercuts effective border enforcement, and it creates a dangerous situation for law enforcement and the public. In this case, the Ninth Circuit ruled that it violates the rights of prisoners for marshals and other sheriffs or other courtroom personnel to employ commonplace, thoughtfully crafted courtroom safety policies in which prisoners appear before a judge fitted with appropriate restraints. This is a significant change from common practice, and it conflicts with two other courts of appeals. More troubling, the decision has prompted public safety concerns for Arizona and throughout the West. First, law enforcement will have no choice but to increase the number of officers needed to maintain the safety of individuals inside courtrooms. This means that more U.S. Marshals and sheriffs will be spending their days in courthouses instead of pursuing violent fugitives or preventing street crime. Even with these increased numbers, law enforcement officials have expressed concern that over the high threshold they're now forced to attain in order to get permission to fit dangerous prisoners with restraints. By putting these restraints on law enforcement rather than prisoners, this ruling limits the ability of sheriffs and U.S. Marshals to ensure the safety of the judges, jurors, lawyers, prisoners, victims, and members of the public inside these courthouses around the country. This decision also dramatically undercuts the federal court's ability to process illegal immigration border crossing cases as part of Operation Streamline, the very successful border enforcement program that's worked so well in some parts of Arizona. By establishing a zero-tolerance approach to illegal border crossings, Operation Streamline has made a dramatic difference in the number of illegal border crossings in communities like Tucson and Yuma. This year, the Operation Streamline program averaged around 45 individuals per hearing. 45 individuals per hearing, but even with these high caseloads, the program could remain efficient, thanks in part to traditional courtroom safety procedures. So they could take 40 prisoners at a time and process them if they were allowed to use the current courtroom practices. These new policies, or these old policies, allowed law enforcement to bring up to 75 individuals into the courtroom at once. But under the Ninth Circuit's decision to relax courtroom safety protocols, law enforcement officers are now forced to limit groups of prisoners before the court to no more than a handful at a time. This makes it increasingly impractical for judges to hear cases due to the amount of time required for law enforcement to move small numbers of prisoners in and out of the courtroom. There simply aren't the hours in a day. Now, I take the independence of the courts very seriously. That's why when every sheriff in my state comes to me and said that there's a court ruling that is endangering their deputies and the public, I'm going to urge that that decision be overturned by the proper authority. This makes a difference in Arizona for another reason as well. We have a lot of older courthouses. Some of them are historic courthouses. These are not, these buildings simply aren't built for today's needs in terms of access for prisoners and the public within these courthouses. Sometimes they have to go in the same doorways, in the same hallways, and if the law enforcement and courtroom security personnel are not allowed to have standards in terms of prisoner restraint, then you endanger the safety of individuals visiting the courthouse and others. And you're simply unable to process the number of cases that we have in Arizona, particularly near the border with regard to immigration cases. So I hope that the High Court, the Supreme Court, will grant cert here and examine this ruling. It really makes a difference in a state like Arizona. So with that, I yield back the balance of my time.